bit of some of the operational chaos. Stuff, yeah, but
All right.
yeah, sure.
If we could reconvene our meeting to open session, the board has been in executive session since 6 o'clock to discuss 3 legal matters and a personnel matter. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Introductions.
Dave Hurst.
Willow Bear.
Ewan McKnight.
Robert Tejan.
Jody Monroe.
Holly Dellenbaugh.
Meredith Moriarty.
John Walston. John McPhillips.
And Catherine will be back inside in just a second. I sincerely hope we don't have any PIG students here tonight, but just in case, there's somebody who's really pushing it to the last second. Okay, good. First up, the approval of minutes. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the minutes from the June 5th, 2024 regular board meeting.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes. 3, meeting reports. First is our superintendent's report.
Sure. So we have a lot of students visiting us tonight on the last board meeting of the school year. So we're going to start with our athletes. We have some really great success in the spring, so I'm going to ask Mr. Keys to come on up and introduce some of our teams that did a great job. And
We're going to go over there.
yeah. So I think when you call them up by team, we're going to want to get, Jillian, you want to get photos of each of the teams as they're announced? Okay.
Well, good evening, everyone. You're going to hear me go on for a little while because it's been quite the spring in a really great way. First team I want to recognize tonight is our boys tennis team, coached by Steve Smith and Dylan Davis. The regular season Suburban Council champions with a 13-0 record. Their 5th Section 2 title in the last 6 years, defeating a very tough Shaker squad 6-3. We then defeated Section 3 champion Fayetteville Manlius 7-0 to punch our ticket once again to the state championships at the USTA Center in New York City. And we wound up making it obviously a state semifinalist. So just a round of applause for an awesome year. And with that, I will introduce the boys. Armin Armabikian, David Bevenu, Rowan Chamberlain. Come on down, fellas. Derek Clark, Jadev Day, Niall Denon. Go on over there by this one. Jackson Gallo. Shen Henson, Anish Giacometti, Bhargava Janga, Ian Jin, John Keating, Dion Santos, Owen Luntz,
That is an impressive activist.
Jacob Lyubov, Kieran McNay, Adi Oja, Vikash Radisevich, Justin Scherer, Kwan Susi, and Kevin Wang. Congratulations. I want to mention that Niall and Adi were also the Section 2 doubles champions, and Coach Smith was the TU Coach of the Year. Congratulations.
Come on in.
Next up, we want to honor our 4 girls outdoor track and field New York State qualifiers. Their girls are coached by Coach Tucker Shrapowitsky. And we have Charlotte O'Meara. Charlotte qualified in the 800-meter run, the 1,500-meter run, and the 4x800 relay. Logan Kuhn, 3,000-meter run, the 4x8-meter relay. Kate Bannigan, 4x800-meter relay, and Liv Pachter, also the 4x800-meter relay. Congratulations. Next up, girls lacrosse, coached by Danny Blanchard, assisted by Erin Jones. Regular season Suburban Council champions, finishing 10-1 in league play. It is our 4th section title in the last 5 years. Defeated Niskayuna 8-3 in the Section 2 Class B finals before losing a really tight, tough regional game. Carolyn Murata, also recognized by USA Lacrosse as an All-American. At this time, I'd like to bring up the ladies. Lucy Buff, Maeve Conway, Addison Daggett, Anna Shrapowitsky, Alexis Hartson, Kirsten Fang, Avery Ike is here, Lauren Sinek, Caroline Murata, Gabrielle Pesca, Brianna Fabian, Kate Tejan, Lillian Ward, Haley Bouchard, Natalie DeSanti, Haley Kibrick, Ellie Coplin, Lauren Brodeur, Gabby Krellin, Maddie Ward, Erica Ruth, Claire McGahee, and Lily Barra. Katie Ryan was our manager. Congratulations, ladies. We had a couple of really special award winners in our boys lacrosse program, coached by Dave Rounds. The boys had an outstanding season, were Section 2 finalists, losing in the finals game, but had an amazing season. I wanted to make sure we knew that Dane Jones was named a All-American by USA Lacrosse. He'll be attending Bates College, where he will be continuing his career. I know he's not with us tonight, but Dane Jones. I also wanted to mention that Bryce Morin, I believe Bryce is here. Come on up, Bryce. Bryce is the recipient of the prestigious Bob Scott Award, also given by USA Lacrosse. Bryce will be attending the Coast Guard Academy, where he will also be continuing his career. And this award recognizes high school seniors who go above and beyond in service to their team, their school, and their community. They truly honor the game of lacrosse, are invested in the development of the game, and are truly special teammates. So congratulations, Bryce. And finally, you might have heard a little something about our baseball team. I don't even know where to start. What an amazing, special group of kids. What an amazing run. Our varsity baseball team, coached by Matt Rabit and Rick Leach, we finished with a record of 19-5. Section 2 AA champions, bringing home Bethlehem's first section title in 25 years, sweeping Averill Park in a best of 3. The state tournament wins over Section 3 West Genesee, Section 1 East Chester in the state semifinal, a very tough Section 11 Hop Hog team that we manhandled pretty much 11-5 to capture the very first New York State team title under the current format in our school's history. So a round of applause for this awesome group. So the more mature people in the crowd will understand what I mean, that they are on their, Johnny Carson, David Letterman tour, these days. The team was honored recently on Monday night at the Bunker, in North Greenbush, hosted by Roger Wineland at News 13. There will be guests of Bethlehem's own former Board of Ed trustee Joanne Cunningham on the July 8th state legislature meeting. And in August, we'll be heading to Yankee Stadium, where the Yankees will honor them. They'll be on the field and get the proper acknowledgement. The day after the championship, I was notified by the American Baseball Coaches Association that Coach Matt Rabid was selected as the regional ABCA Coach of the Year. So congratulations, round of applause for these guys. I have lots of rosters up here. So. Okay, let's see who we have here. Peter Baltus, Andrew Bratt, Tim Bouchard, Nolan Devigian, Mike Evangelista, CJ Franchini, Bobby Frick, Scott Hutton, Andrew Johnston, Paul Laurie, Gavin Martin, Sean Matros, Christian Mikulski, Joe Montserrat, Jason Pajak, Eli Proper, Rich Saboti, Scott Slurs, Tim Sparks, Owen Turner, and Mike Waldemeyer. Also want to make sure we bring up our awesome manager, Brian Hornick, who was helped out by Maggie Eloricio and Kelsey Von Weedle this season. Round of applause. So Summer League has started, and as you can see, our players are playing all summer long. Come on up, Rick. He's shy.
Nice try.
Congratulations. So real quick to close out, we also had 6 of our spring teams that were designated Scholar Athlete teams. These are teams that carried a 90-plus average. That was our boys and girls outdoor track and field team, our softball team, see you buddy, boys tennis, girls lacrosse, and flag football. And speaking of flag football, it was our inaugural season. It was a huge success, tons of excitement. We even had our first sectional win, so I'm sure before long our flag football team will be up here. And I just hope everybody has a great summer, and I appreciate all your support. Thank you.
We're good, we're good. Need some more students coming. So, yeah, very good. So great.
We have some, Jillian, we have some slides for this, right?
Yes.
Okay. So we have some grade 5 Eagle students who are here waiting patiently to talk about a program at Eagle. And I see Mrs. Martone and Mrs. Reagan are both here. So you guys want to come on up and present?
Hi, I'm Harper. Every Monday we shared what filled our buckets either on Friday or over the weekend. I shared that a boy named Irving was reading to a younger boy named Donnie on the bus. It was so nice, and I was thinking, what if we started a club where older kids read to younger kids on the bus? Then it exploded and everyone had ideas and questions, and we had a great discussion.
Getting Ms. Reagan on board was a crucial part of getting the BBC to work. We presented our idea as well as some possible problems that we had already thought over.
We created this video to inform the grades what we were thinking. We sent it to all of the students' parents.
Brendan Evelyn. These are members of the BBC, aka the Bus Book Club. I will be asking them some very important questions. News reporter. Today I will be interviewing Brendan Evelyn. These are members. Sorry, I mean news report.
Just before it.
The news report. Today I'll be interviewing Brennan Evelyn. These are members of the BBC, aka the Bus Book Club. I will be asking them some very important questions to cover everything. If you have an interest in this, we will send you a form. That includes information about the club. And if you have any questions or concerns, you can write them in the form. Here comes Brennan Evelyn!
Thank you, Julia. I mean, news reporter. We're so excited to be here. We're ready for your questions.
Alrighty then, here's your first question. Why did you want to start the BBC?
Well, we wanted to start the BBC so the buses were not so loud and crazy, and so kids could practice their reading.
How did this start exactly?
Well, it started when we were having a morning meeting. Harper shared how she'd seen Irving, the third grader, being to a kindergarten, and it filled her bucket.
Now, how do you expect to make this work?
Well, we are going to make posters and flyers, and we are going to make this video to the best of our abilities.
How do you expect to make kids enjoy this?
Well, we want it to be like a classroom buddy time, but on the bus, so then kids will, like you said, enjoy it more. Other kids are going to make a form so they can determine what kinds of books the kids enjoy reading, and then make sure that we have those books to read together.
Well, that's a wrap. Look for the form, and we'll send you that, and the flyers around the school.
Promote the idea across the grades. We made a few Canva flyers, one big poster that we put in the cafeteria, and 3 posters for the teacher's lounge. So they could get an idea about the BBC too. We felt like vests were really important so the kids didn't get lost as they tried to find their buddy. And it would also be cool for the 5th graders to wear the vests. A group searched for a good option and found one that was on sale. Could come in orange, and we could get the BBC on it.
To start the BBC, we had to get all the 5th graders trained. We started training. Oh, wait, I'm in the wrong one. Which one am I in? This one? Oh. We've developed K-2 to sign up kids who wanted to join. The parents told us the types of books they liked and didn't like and to ask us questions. Then we developed a form for the 5th graders to sign up and tell us why they would be a good group member.
Most of the adults were worried about encountering bad language, inappropriate content, or where their child would sit. We created a fax to answer the questions for everyone and sent that all to their parents.
To start the BBC, we had to get all the 5th graders trained. We created training slides and then made this contract they signed to show that they would be kind, respectful, and responsible.
I loved being part of the BBC because I got to know a new buddy who sat with me on the bus, and she was more open and talked to me more. And I actually read with 2 buddies at the same time, and we looked forward to doing it every time. As we got into the groove of things, some kids that were involved in the planning of things but didn't go on the bus wanted to do it too.
So we created a club for people who didn't go on the bus. They read in the hallway outside of the kids' classroom.
The B4 BBC was a great opportunity for kids who didn't ride the bus but still wanted to participate.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. You guys want to come up here? Talk to me. I have a pin. I've got pins. Thanks for coming.
Nice job.
Especially on the first day of summer vacation.
Good job, guys.
Thank you so much for coming and doing that on the very beginning of your summer vacation. It sounds like a great program, so we have a couple other things, but if you want to read before. Bye.
Okay.
And just two other things I wanted to provide an update. Actually, John wanted to provide an update to the board on the EV grant awards, and then Dave has a quick overview of a couple things regarding the grading policy, which is on the agenda for this evening. So, John, why don't you just do a quick update on that?
Thanks, Jody. During the May 2024 ballot, the voters approved 3 EV large buses and 3 small buses. Tied to the EV buses were 2 grant opportunities that the district were applying to both the federal and state government. I'm happy to inform the board and the public that on the EPA federal side associated with the Clean School Bus Program, the district received $200,000 for 6 buses for a total grant amount of $1.2 million. And on the New York State Bus Incentive Program, which is being sponsored by NYSERDA on the state side, $220,500 per EV bus for a total of $661,500. So between both the federal and the state side, just under $1.9 million in federal and state grant funding. For the 3 EV buses that the voters approved in May, that translates to a 0 local impact in terms of out-of-pocket expense for local taxpayers. So that was a huge benefit. We will not have to, the school district and school district taxpayers will not have to pay any local taxes towards the 3 EV buses that we'll be getting next year. The NYSERDA has changed the NYSBIT program moving forward in terms of stackability. Presently, under the existing programs, you can stack both your federal funding and your state funding to maximize both grant funding amounts. As of July 1st, 2024, NYSERDA has capped, if you get EPA funding, the state funding at $100,000. So in a very fast and furious coordination with Matthews Buses, we submitted a second New York State Bus Incentive Program application today that is under the old rules that will allow us to maximize both EPA funding and the NYSERDA funding. It does not commit the board to any action moving forward, but I wanted to make sure at least that the application had a state stamp prior to July 1st so we can maximize that funding. We'll see where that goes moving forward. That will be for consideration by the board and the public for May of 2025. Again, there's nothing committing either the voters or the board to take action just yet, but I wanted to at least get from a mechanical perspective our stake in the ground, so to speak. There will be a board action in the July meeting just doing some mechanical budget amendments to effectuate that, but I did want to give just sort of a quick update on both of those grant opportunities.
Thank you. Yeah, first of all, thank you. Thank you to Matthews. Thank you to the transportation team, everybody in your office who helps get these things together. I know that these applications are not small undertakings, and I'm very grateful that the district has prioritized both moving forward with the electric transition and embracing all opportunities for funding to do so. I guess my question is just, have we sent any, so let me take a step back. My position on this is that for NYSERDA to remove the stackability undermines both the state mandate to go fully electric, as well as undermines the larger goals of reducing emissions, better air quality, better lung health, all of that. So I'm wondering if there's agreement on that. Is there an opportunity to put in a formal letter to NYSERDA saying that we object to this change, that it makes more sense both from a policy and a fiscal side to continue to allow for the stacking? I'm not confident that they will read a letter from our school district and immediately jump to change, but I do think that it's important to be documenting from the stakeholders' perspective how and why things need to change. So I offer that for consideration, if that's something that the administration would be willing to take on, or if that's something that the board could take on, but putting that out there.
It's really a board action. I mean, one of the points I'd like to raise is I think NYSERDA was looking to change the stackability for the prior year, and Bethlehem, because it was so far in the process, had a proposition drafted on the ballot already. We were able to, I think because of Bethlehem's initiative, have that changed to July 1st of 2024. From NYSERDA's perspective, I think they're trying to just expand as much state funding for stakeholders moving forward. That's at least what has been communicated by NYSERDA in the various public sessions it has had. It's unclear to me if this is a NYSERDA directive from the governor's office, from the Division of Budget, so we can certainly investigate.
Yeah, that's what
some
I was gonna ask,
opportunities.
like where the change in what the protocols were, where did that actually come from? Did it come from?
Well, it was communicated by NYSERDA directly, but I'm not sure what other conversations that agency may have had with other state agencies.
And we could certainly CC the governor, the lieutenant governor, and everybody all the way down. I think the point is, the point that I'm hoping to make is that, yes, I understand the goals of doing what you can to extend funding, but if the funding is not sufficient to support the purchases, then making that pool less deep doesn't get us necessarily closer to our goals. So anyway, this is something that we could continue to discuss. We could take offline. I could talk with whomever the right person is, but just to get from a stakeholder perspective and to get that into the public discourse around how this is being funded, because there's a lot of conversation at the state level around what NYSERDA could not, should not be funding in this.
Unless there's an objection, I mean, my suggestion would maybe be if you wanted to draft
Happily.
a letter
Yeah.
and circulate it, and then the board, I think it would probably be easier to have a sense of what you're
Perfect.
thinking of sending.
Absolutely. Happily.
Anything else, John? Any
Not
other
an easy
questions related to grant?
Thank you.
Sounds all good, thanks.
Okay, and last, Dave just wanted to, we had a conversation about grading a while ago, and so since this was on for the policy committee met and it's on the agenda, I just asked him to highlight just a couple pieces that I think just to revisit this, so.
Thank you. So as you're aware, we actually began having discussions around grading in 2018. We had Tom Gusky, who is sort of the international expert on grading, if you will. He's been with us 4 or 5 times now to work with administrators and teachers on just grading practices themselves, the history of grading, and sort of best practices in grading. And then last year, the entire middle and high school did a book study on equitable grading practices. We used Tom Feldman's book. And if you recall, last January at the board retreat, I actually sort of gave a summary of that as well. But basically, he breaks it down into sort of 3 equitable grading practices, and these are spelled out in the policy that grades should be accurate, bias-resistant, and motivational. So over the course of last year and then pushing into this year, we had a secondary grading committee that was comprised of representatives from every department, from the middle and the high school. We met on a monthly basis, and then they met 5 times throughout the year with their departments to review sort of discussion prompts that I created for them, and then we took that feedback, and that's what we, as a larger group, sort of worked through. And that's how we sort of came to the, including the accurate, bias-resistant, motivational recommendations for the policy, as well as the idea of a grading scale. And I presented this back in the fall when I did the academic update. Currently, we have a 0 to 100 point scale, which really does have an orientation towards failure, right? You have 64 ways to fail, but only 35 ways to pass, or 36 ways to pass. Whereas schools that are using letter grade systems, that's not the case, right? And throughout the country, about 80% of the high schools in the country and secondary schools use letter grades, only 20% use number. So we are by far in the minority in terms of using number grades. So we did have a very lengthy discussion about transitioning to a letter grade system. It has challenges associated with that. The sort of broader recommendations, if you're going to use a letter grade system, simply using A through F is the preferred method, because as soon as you start adding pluses and minuses in, now you're adding more granularity. So at that point, you're almost, might as well just stay with a number system. So that's where this idea of a minimum grading scale was developed. Many schools do use this that continue to use number grades. Basically what you're saying is that the scale only runs from 50 to 100, so now it more mirrors the letter grade scale. That's not to say if you don't turn something in, you get a 50, right? We still have a way of handling that with an incomplete. This is for work that's completed, right, where students actually do the work. The lowest grade they can actually receive is a 50. And you can't think of it as, well, you're just giving kids points if they deserve a 34, why are we giving them a 50? You really have to look at it as, it's just mirroring a letter grade system, right? So in simple terms, like 50 to 60 is your F, right? 60 to 70 is your D, and so forth. It's sort of that concept that everything is still in manageable gradations, because the problem with the 0 to 100 system is if you give a student a 0 on an assignment early in the marking period, say, they can't climb out of that. So now what is their motivation to do anything for the rest of that marking period, right? So by allowing them the chance to actually recover from a poor performance, that's where sort of that motivational piece comes in. In the schools that have shifted to this model, this scale is really only meant to target that type of student, right? This is not going to have any impact on your students that traditionally are in the passing range, right? It's the students that are failing, but failing with sort of below 50 numbers that never, ever, ever have the chance to recover. So that's really the population that this is targeting. Also utilizing the idea of the incomplete for students that just are not doing work. We're not giving them 50 points for not doing the work. They're going to get an incomplete, and then we're going to have processes that are going to kind of help navigate what to do in those situations. So that's the rationale between the 50 to 100. Is sort of what schools have come to. It's sort of the compromise of, we don't want to go to a letter system because that changes, that's a whole different mindset. It's a whole different changing students that are now, say, juniors and seniors, going back and changing historical information on transcripts. We felt that just going with the 50 to 100 made much more sense. So now that we have this 50 to 100 in place, over the course of next year, we're going to do even more work because we still have some work to do in terms of sort of consistency within courses, right? So teacher A, teacher B have the same course, and their grading system's not exactly the same, or they're not using common assessments, right? So that's our push for next year. Many courses are already there, but there are some courses that we need to move in that direction. So we have now alignment about what the purpose of grades is, and we're going to be working over the course of next year to calibrate scales within courses, focusing on mastery of content rather than compliance. Some already offer this, and we're going to look to expand this, the idea of mastery learning and the ability to retake assessments, right? If the goal is to truly have students demonstrate that they understand the material as opposed to sort of, I just need to get this number. There's ways to do retakes under mastery learning that has been very successful, and we're hoping to expand that somewhat. So that this way we end up with equitable outcomes for all students, but especially our underserved student populations, and ongoing PD. Again, we've been doing PD in this realm since 2018 now, and we're going to continue to do so. So that's just some of the, again, recapping where we've come to get to where we are with the policy. Many of these things we discussed actually in 2020 at the board retreat in January. I outlined all of Gusky's work, and then this past January, 2 Januaries ago, we did Feldman's work. So this is just a summary of that work. And that's it.
So just as a practical matter, if you have, say you have a 10-point folder quiz.
Yeah.
Right? And a student takes it and gets all the questions wrong because they're not that organized. Does that mean that the lowest grade they can get on the folder quiz is a 5?
Yeah, so that's something we're going to be working through departments with, because obviously the 50 to 100 scale represents report cards, right? But then you have what happens in your classroom. So we don't want teachers saying, well, I'm just never going to use the 100-point scale. Everything I give is going to be out of 99 points because now I can give a 0, right? So everything's going to have to be sort of proportional to this, within the spirit of this, right? The goal is everything needs to be within the spirit of this idea. That if your scale is 20 points, then you can't have 12 of those points be failing and only 8 be passing, if that makes sense. So we already have a lot of teachers doing this by simply just using rubrics, right? So like to say that zeros are not allowed, that's true when you have large scales, but if your rubric goes from 0 to 4, a 0 is fine, right? On an A to F scale, a 0 is fine, because an A is a 4, a B is a 3, a C is a 2, D is a 1, and F's a 0. Like, that's fine. But when you have a 50-point scale and you now have a 0, how is a student ever to recover from that, right? So it's just aligning your numeric scale to a traditional A through F system is really what's happening.
But the scale doesn't necessarily correspond to the impact of that assignment. If it's a 100-point scale on an assignment that's worth 0.5% for the marking period, getting a 0 doesn't do anything to you. You can recover easily.
You say that, but I've yet to see a grade book where a teacher has something be 0.5% of their grade. Most assignments carry significant weight in a student's grade.
So back to Holly's example, if this folder assignment is 10% of that student's grade,
Right?
and they got every question wrong,
Yep.
what are they going to score on it?
So if they get a 5 on every single one of those, they're still failing for the year. So that's why the push is to go to a letter, because if you have a letter grade, you just give an F, 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 the kid still fails. If I give a kid 5, 5, 5, 5, 5, they still fail. What's the difference between a 5 that still transitions to a failure, or the letter F, or a 0? Like, what does a 0 do other than completely crush a student? That's the heart of this.
But if a student's got 5 Fs, they can recover from that equally or not, the same way they can recover from 0.
Not true at all. On a 4-point scale, right, an A and an F together falls at a C. On a 100-point scale, a 0 and a 100, you get a 50. You're still failing. It's not a mathematically accurate scale. It's skewed towards failure. 2/3 of the scale is failing, 1/3 of the scale is passing. A through F scale, 20% is failure, 80% is passing. It's a huge discrepancy.
Catherine?
I just want to clarify something, because I kind of hear you advocating for a letter grading scale, and yet the policy proposal before us this evening is the 50 to 100 scale. And could you just talk through?
Yeah, so it's, I mean.
Could you talk that through?
Yeah, so again, it's more a, I guess, preference within the departments to not go to a letter scale.
Here at Bethlehem.
Here at Bethlehem. Again, so about 80% of the schools in the country use letter, 20% use numeric. New York, though, it's like 90% use numeric and 10% use letter. Like, New York is the Northeast in general is where this 20% comes from. So sort of, they did not want to move away from that tradition of using letters. There are some.
Using numbers.
Of using numbers. There are some limitations to going to letters, right? Especially if you only do A to F. Now you could have, 10% of your population could have straight A's, right? And now the worry is, how do you start to delineate for scholarships and things of that nature? And even if you go to a plus-minus system, that becomes a little bit trickier. So it was just the preference of the committee to stay with numbers, really.
Thank you.
Yep.
And just to clarify, I mean, the research, what Dave was saying is the 0 to 100 scale is not mathematically appropriate because it gives so many more opportunities to fail. That's been out there for 20 years plus, maybe longer. I mean, when we've had Gusky in, there's a ton of research on grading that shows how unfair that system is for grading. But the reality is we often, as teachers, we grade the way we were graded, and that's just carried forward. So I think that the work the district has done and the teachers have done, the departments, ideally, if you could do a letter grading, maybe that's, what more of the country is doing. But I think this kind of where we landed with the 50 to 100 is a huge gain for where we were.
And I also think the percentage of students that this is actually going to impact is fairly small, right? Like the percentage of our students that are historically scoring below 50 on multiple assignments it's a very, very small population. So we're again, it's this, and many of them are underserved. They don't have access to tutors. They don't have the opportunity to stay after school for help because they have to do other things. Like these are our students that are struggling with other areas, right? So to then crush them with zeros, now their willingness to even come to school is diminished on top of that. These are our students that end up having a huge absenteeism rate, right? This just compounds it because they feel like they're just running around this hamster wheel and they can't get anywhere because they're just constantly so far behind that there's nothing they can do to recover. So at that point, they just stop coming to school.
Can I just piggyback on that and address? So I I think for the students who are always on one end or the other, won't see any difference. So I have a student who struggles academically, and he, this quarter, for example, got a 38 on something at the very beginning of the quarter, and no matter what he did the rest of the quarter, it was like dragging that grade up 1 point at a time, and there was nothing that he was going to be able to do to get it back where it needed to be. So it's students like that that are struggling to try to hang in, I think, that are going to be impacted by this sort of an idea. And it is so discouraging to those students to get completely dragged down by one assignment and not be able
And this serves, Dave, I think the adjective is motivational, the one pillar, so that your sense is that this would serve that pillar in the sense that it won't put a kid in a situation where they just are, so despondent, there's no digging out.
Correct.
I'm not necessarily opposed to this change. The only reason that the 100-point scale is biased in the way you look at it towards failure is the arbitrary lines for where passing is, right? No, I grew up in the British system. The exams are written so that 40% is passing. You can easily write exams that way, and now your scale is suddenly 2/3 passing.
Right, which is, so that kind of goes back to the whole idea of letter grades as well. So, and I used AP as an example for this. So the AP exams are scaled on a 1 through 5 point system, right? But that doesn't equate to like a 5 is a 90 and a 4 is an 80 and so forth. Many of the exams, anywhere between 65 to 70% of all of the raw points will get you a 5.
Right.
Right? So to your point, yes. And that's why in colleges, the letter grade system works, because every professor, in fact, has their own sort of 0 to 100 scale in the course, but for one course, a 70 might be an A, and another one, and 90 might be an A, it depends on the course. We don't, to get away from that, this sort of helps with that too, yeah.
Is it just that, like you had said, you can put pass or fail, anywhere you want? Is it just that the minimum grading scale keeps the sort of the arbitrary numbers that the people are familiar with while achieving the goal?
Well, correct.
Right.
That's really what it comes down to, is it's a familiarity thing. There were a lot of the comments that we got back from teachers, and we did talk to some students and some parents, was just this perception that what are colleges going to now do if we change our system, right? And I reached out to colleges from all across the country, and they're basically like, well, you do realize like 80% of the schools are already using letter grades, and some schools are using a 0 to 10 scale, some are using like a 1 to 5, like schools are doing different things all over the place. There's a consortium of the prep schools that are using a standards-based report card where it's looks nothing like a traditional report card. Colleges figure it out, but it's still made parents uneasy. Like I need to know that my student's a 98 student, not an A+ student, because now how is, there's a difference between a 98 and a 97, but if we're both A+s, then that's where the rub came in, yeah, for sure. So.
Well, and there is a difference in admissions,
Yeah.
between a 98 and an A. So if you're not doing A+s, right, that A becomes really hard to evaluate.
For sure.
In the context of elite admissions. It's
Right.
just too wide.
Right, and even when you go to plus and minuses, there's still a 3-point gap, and especially, higher performing schools, there's a big difference within that 3-point gap for
Yeah.
students, yeah. So that was the other piece, for sure.
Thank you. Anything else? Okay. Next is our board report, first, I know there was a facilities committee meeting since we had our last meeting, and John, I was hoping you could say a couple words about that.
Sure. Facilities committee met last Monday. We reviewed the most recent change orders, discussed those, on the agenda for this week. Summer, they have a really great punch list, good plan for managing things, and budget is looking healthy. Still waiting for some more information on the roof here, and as soon as we have that, we'll share that with you guys.
Everything at the middle school auditorium, is that proceeding as desired?
Perfect and wonderful.
Thank you. I also just wanted to recognize that it is the official last day of the school year. And I wanted to just say congratulations for everybody who will be graduating tomorrow. And to thank our teachers and staff for all of their work this year. And we really appreciate it and hope everybody has a great summer. Meredith, I think you had a question about.
Yes, I just wanted to discuss the heat wave that we had last week and the air conditioning issue. So I personally wanted to thank everyone who's involved with getting the quick action on the portable air conditioners for the Regents exams. I think that was very important. I don't think the kids could have performed in an unhealthy environment, and I know that was a very quick thing that happened, so I do want to thank everyone for that. And also the difficult decision to do the half days. I'm sure that was a difficult decision. I know it was difficult for many working parents, but I do believe it was the right decision because it was simply unhealthy for the children. But that does bring up the question, okay, we got through this crisis. What are we going to do next year when this happens again, because it will happen again, and then also long term? I think those are two different questions. So I was asking, I'll ask now that at our next board presentation we have, at our next board meeting we have a presentation on some long-term solutions. What would it take to get air conditioning in all of our buildings? What are the options? Are there some energy efficient options that maybe we could get grants for? I think there's a lot to look into the long-term question. So I think we'll have a presentation on that. But also, I think we need to talk about some short-term solutions. This probably is going to happen again next year. So what can we do now to prepare for even, September could be a painful month, or next June. I understand we probably got these portable air conditioning units at an emergency rate. So what can we do now?
They were definitely emergency rate.
Yeah, emergency rate. So what can we do now to prepare for the possibility that we probably, and Regents, again, are going to late June.
Next year.
What can we do now to lock in a better rate if that is something that we're going to need? And also, what is our procedure? Let's have an established procedure for when we are going to have to call half days. If parents know ahead of time that half days are going to be called when the heat index is X, then I think perhaps working parents can prepare better. So I was just wondering if we also could have a discussion about that at our next board meeting.
Yeah, we already spoke with Nick and Sonia, our Director of Facilities, and he's planning to put together a presentation for some short and long-term options for the board to consider. We do have some mitigation strategies already in place that we've been using. Obviously, with 100+ heat index, it was none of those things really did much, but we can talk about those options.
And then also, during our budget discussions, I know we discussed the possibility of buying portable air conditioning for I think we said our worst 10% of our classrooms. And we had some money that we were going to put towards that. Has all that money now been eaten up by the Regents?
Well, we didn't put money toward, in this part of the budget process, Nick had asked and it was approved to buy the large pedestal fans for air circulation, not air conditioning.
Okay.
So that was already, those are being purchased with those funds, but there is no line for air conditioning. This was just used from district funds. We just found the money for it.
Then I think also in our next budget meeting, and obviously that'll be something that we discuss, but whether that should be a line item on our budget from this point forward. So.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yep.
Catherine?
Just a couple piggybacking. Thank you, Meredith, because I think that's all on point. The only things that I'd add to that is I'm really interested, in addition to the facilities aspect of this, which is incredibly important, really underlining what are those policies and procedures and practices that we can put in place, and when we do again, going back to what Meredith was saying, I just want to lift up, like, part of the biggest challenge that I heard from parents was the unexpected, right, the unexpected nature of the closures. And so how do we, you know, whether it is literally a policy or whether it is a practice or whatever, how do we get that in place and communicate that? The other thing is there is a bill on the governor's desk that would require districts statewide to have policies in place for what happens if we have heat hitting 82 degrees in classrooms. And these are policies that we probably already do, such as lowering the blinds,
Right.
turning off the lights, right? But having an actual framework for that. And then closing instructional spaces if the heat gets above 88. So that's something that could be coming our way, as well as some state work around that.
And that came up at our BOCES meeting. I think the challenge with that is, you know, you've got there's so many issues with that, like where do kids go?
Right.
You've got the State Athletic Association, which allows kids to play and participate with a 96-degree heat index. So it doesn't make sense where kids can play out on a lacrosse field at 96 degrees, but they can't be in a classroom at 88. Then a lot of kids, we made sure that kids received meals before they left, because there are kids who need that too. And if you send kids home or don't allow schools to use those spaces, in our district, you know, we certainly have families in many districts, they're dependent upon breakfast and lunch and after-school care. So there's a lot of challenges with that going through.
Yeah.
Did you have something you wanted to say?
No, it's something totally different.
Okay, something. Did you wanted to say something? I have one more thing, but it's about you. So if you have something else you want to say,
Oh, yes, I have something else.
Go ahead.
I just won't say anything about me. I just wanted, so I attended the Bethlehem Pride Festival this weekend that the board had passed a resolution to formally acknowledge, along with the county and the town. And I had a number of people at the Pride Festival make a point to find me and express gratitude to the board for formally acknowledging that event. So I wanted to pass that along to you all. The event itself sparked some very unpleasant experiences for families in this community who were targeted, and students in our school buildings who were targeted. And some of the comments that were coming back from the middle school in particular were incredibly discouraging. And so the parents that made a point of finding me to thank the board for supporting that event. I just wanted to make sure that I passed that along to you guys, because I'm not sure that anyone else really appreciates how big a deal that was to some of the families in this community.
Thank you for sharing that. Anybody have anything that's not about Willow?
I have 3 things about Will. No.
Because I just wanted to, this is obviously Willow's last board meeting with us. And Willow, I just wanted to thank you for your service to the district. It has been a pleasure serving with you on the board. Those are for you. You will be missed, and I know I've always appreciated your advocacy for all of our students. And I also have another little bag for you. So, thank you very much. This is not sufficient, but.
I'm gonna open that later.
Yes.
If that's okay.
Yes.
I made you promise not to do this, so I wasn't going to say anything. I have loved being on the board. I would not have retired if I'm not facing an incredible challenge professionally right now that needs more attention. But I've had some pretty high level and important jobs, and being on the board has been just like an absolute honor. having served during COVID in particular, I felt like it was just all the public service for my entire life at one time. But I will still be around, and I will still come and torture you about certain topics near and dear to my heart. So
I hope that
thank
you
you
do.
guys.
Yeah, look forward to it.
So, give you a round of applause.
Just leave it there, yeah.
I'm gonna leave them.
You just leave them there.
Okay. I should.
The
put my
next
rocking
thing,
chair out?
to turn from one thing to the other, the next thing on our agenda, our first presentation this evening, is a overview and discussion of property tax exemptions.
It's fun.
Wow.
Well, I was like, I'm gonna just hide behind my nose.
You couldn't wait until the next board meeting.
So this presentation was generated from a request from a member of the community, particularly the veterans groups, on changes in the district's veterans property tax exemption. Looking at that in sort of general, it's difficult to sort of look at any one particular exemption in isolation. So what I try to do is drill this up, spread it out for everyone's benefit. It does talk about the veterans exemption specifically, but I'd like to at least first socialize some larger, broader concepts. So property taxes in general and assessed value are really a closed system. Any changes within the system is going to impact something else in that closed system. So estimated tax rates are based on the division of the levy by the taxable assessed value of the towns within the district, namely the town of Bethlehem and the town of New Scotland, to get your tax rate per $1,000 of assessed value. For the 24-25 school year, the estimate as of today for the town of Bethlehem is $22.31 per thousand of assessed value, and for the town of New Scotland, it's $22.63 per $1,000 of assessed value. There's a slight difference between the tax rates because of equalization rates, and the taxable assessed value subtracts out all of the exempt assessed value across all categories of exemptions to get to that tax rate. So any change in exemption category, whether it's veterans or any of the other ones, will impact that tax rate calculation. Between the towns of New Bethlehem and New Scotland, there's roughly $5.2 billion with a B dollars of total equalized assessed value throughout the Bethlehem footprint. There's 5,667 exempt parcels for a equalized assessed value associated with those parcels of $707.6 million. That roughly represents 13.7% of exempted assessed value over the total assessed value for the district, which means 86.3% is where the tax levy gets distributed on any given year. So any changes, increases or decreases in any category of an exemption category will change that proportion between exempt and non-exempt and then carry over and impact the tax rate. Throughout the district, there are several exemption categories. I sort of listed these by the highest equalized assessed value moving down. Significant assessed value on the IDA, the Industrial Development Agency. You get into your senior exemptions and your basic star exemptions, which most folks are familiar with. You get into your nonprofits, your school district, namely Bethlehem, the town, New York State, the various fire companies and departments through the town. You'll see your veterans here. This is what the present value of exempt parcels are, 940 for veterans, at a rough total assessed value of $9.4 million. Next slide, please. And we go into some of the smaller categories. I do want to note that the first responder exemption is the exemption that the district passed December of 2023 for roughly $4.3 million, but between these various categories gets you to your 5,600 parcels for your $707.6 million in assessed value. Getting to the alternative veterans exemption. It's alternative only because way back in the day, there was an original veterans exemption that was tied to federal monies if you were a veteran that you used to purchase your property. When the new veterans exemption came into play several years ago, they just named it the alternative veterans exemption. So with regard to the veterans exemption, there are various levels of bands by which any taxing jurisdiction can choose. I did a quick poll of the Capital Region school districts in the area and asked, hey, do you folks have a veterans exemptions on your book? And if so, where do you stack up? So I didn't get a full response, but for those school districts that did respond, there are 7 school districts that do not have any veterans exemption. There are 6, including Bethlehem, which is at that beige colored band, and you can see where the other ones stack out. Now, Bethlehem was one of the first school districts in the area to implement the veterans exemption when it first became available for the 2015 property tax bill. After that, the state added some various additional bands at the taxing jurisdiction's discretion and authority to increase. You need to choose a band. You can't necessarily pick between the various bands. So there's a wartime exemption. If you're a veteran that served during wartime, you can get up to 15% of your assessed value as an exemption up to those dollar amounts. If you happen to also serve in combat during that time period, it's up to 10%. And for a disability, that disability of 50%, up to 50% is determined by the Veterans Affairs, Department of Veterans Affairs, if your disability is 50% or higher, for a total max, as you can see in those bands. This slide represents the number of parcels within Bethlehem at 938, the current exempt assessed value based on what the district has on the books now, and what the max exempt equalized value, you can go back just one slide, at that bottom band level. Forward, please. And what that translates to. So if the district were to exempt to authorize the highest exemption level for veterans, it represents roughly a 521% increase in the exemption value specifically for veterans. And that changes from 1.3% presently to 7.7%. So again, any change to the veterans exemption is at the district discretion, subject to adoption by the board via resolution. Again, you have to pick a particular band level. You cannot mix them. The shift from the current level to the maximum level is a 650% increase in the actual band levels, which translates to a 521% increase in an exemption value. So trying to look at this in terms of real dollar impact, for a veteran with a wartime in combat designation, with a property assessed at $250,000, they would see a decrease of roughly almost $1,500. But again, anytime you change any exemption categories, there's going to be winners and losers. The impact to the rest of the tax base with that change is roughly $65 for a house assessed at $250,000. That translates into a property tax increase of just over 1% before we look at anything else for future budgets. So any additional tax increase that the district would need to levy would come on top of that. Again, this is strictly for informational purposes. There's nothing the board needs to do tonight, but I wanted to at least provide some basic foundation and knowledge in terms of what the veterans impact, veteran exemption looks like, the opportunities and the impact. The original request came for the veterans exemption impact, but back in August of 2022, the state of New York passed a change in the limited income exemption as well, which increased the max income level for an exemption for seniors and those individuals with disabilities from 37,400 to 58,400. And that provides up to a 50% exemption on assessed value. Again, taxing entities have discretion on how to roll that out. And any individual taxing jurisdiction can pick and choose and push and pull on that. It's not as tightly or as firmly based as the veterans exemption. So for seniors with a combined income of $98,700, the enhanced STAR credit, which is a different exemption category, still applies, as does the basic STAR credit as well. The challenge with the limited income exemption is that I don't have access to the various income levels for property owners within the town. So I can't really calculate for you folks, hey, what if we were to change the exemption level from 37,400 to somewhere up to 58,400? I just don't have the tax and finance data to really gauge that. Go to the next slide, please. Albany County, at the county level, back in December of I'm going to mix up my years here, but relatively recently, Albany County enacted the limited income exemption at the county tax jurisdiction level. For the town of Bethlehem, that resulted roughly in a 14.8% increase in exemption value strictly for the town of Bethlehem at the Albany County tax portion of the bill. Because this is application based by individuals seeking this exemption, I really, again, can't calculate what that's going to be. My guess, though, however, would be for the district, for the school district specifically, the impact would be larger than 15% because the school tax bill is such a significantly higher proportion of the overall tax bill. I would, with the advertising and the publicity associated with such a change, my guess is that it would increase the applications as well as the assessed value that would be exempt, pushing additional tax burden to those individuals that aren't enrolled in any other exemption category. This is Bethlehem's current income level threshold under the old income exemption law. Again, the highest level is $37,400, and it's sort of a sliding scale. So from $0 to $29,000, if that's what your income level is, the district provides a 50% exemption on your property taxes, and depending on how your level of income increases, you can see that there's a sliding scale on the percentage of assessed value that is exempt. Again, I'm sorry, one slide before. The district can, again, play around with any of these numbers. They can change in terms of both the income level and the exemption level. The only really governing rules on the limited income is can't be any more than 58,400 is the max on the income, and it can't be any more than 50% on the exemption level. So again, the district has flexibility on whatever it sees fit to move forward, subject to board authorization. In terms of timing, again, this presentation was just to provide a very, very, as brief as I could make it, background on property tax exemptions and the impact to the tax levy and the tax rate. Board discussion over the next several months. If the board is interested in looking at exemptions, either the veterans exemption or the limited income exemption or any other exemptions, that conversation really should be finalized late fall, early winter of 2024. So that members of the public can get their applications in, speak with the assessor's office no later than March 1st, 2025, which is the taxable status date. Our 25-26 budget in May will look back to that taxable status date for purposes of the calculation of the tax rates for a September 30th, 2025 tax bill. So there is time to ask questions, get additional information. I just wanted to provide a quick schedule in terms of where defining decision points are should the board want to entertain any changes in exemption categories.
Thank you. Anybody have questions? Catherine?
So this is exclusively a board action, or will this also go out to referendum at any point?
As far as I understand, there's no referendum. It's all determined by the taxing jurisdiction. Any decision that the school district makes does not necessarily apply to other taxing entities, whether it's the town, fire districts, or the county.
The 938 number for veterans, is that self-reported, people who are currently claiming
Yes.
an exemption?
So that is pulled directly off the assessment roll provided by both the towns of Bethlehem and New Scotland. So
Okay.
those are the current number of veterans that receive one or a combination of veterans exemptions, whether wartime, combat, and/or disability.
But that could increase, right, because
It
of the
could.
Cold War?
Well, I'm sorry, it also includes the Cold War ones as well.
It does?
It does.
Okay. But I guess it still could increase if there's people that are out there that haven't.
Yes,
sought
my
it.
guess is between the two exemption categories, veterans probably have maximized that because it's been well-known for several years.
Okay.
Less so now than a few years back. The veterans population were from wars that were earlier in time. So those folks had applied. One thing I do want to know, whether it's the veterans exemption or limited income exemption, you can combine those, meaning that if you are a senior with a veteran and a first responder, and oh, by the way, you're a member of the cloth, and you have a manure silo on your property because that's an actually designated property exemption, you can combine all those together and take advantage of all those exemption categories.
And of that 900 number, do we know how many hit each category?
I do. That was a summary of all of the veterans exemption categories. I do have them broken up by combat, wartime, Cold War, and disability. The disability isn't significant, fortunately, but.
And those get stacked, right? In other words?
Yes, so it's 10, like, if you meet the necessary qualifications, you can get up to
50%, right?
whatever the total value is.
Understood. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Yep.
Our second presentation this evening is on special ed.
Okay, hopefully I will be able to address some of the questions that came up at the last board meeting. And if you have any further questions, feel free to ask them at the end. So initially, I want to start with an overview of student support services. Student support services does encompass special education, multi-tiered system of support, MTSS, counseling, and equity and diversity. So this is the makeup of the overall department. It's a pretty big area within the K-12 school district. The department goals are obviously to educate and prepare all students to reach their full potential and provide vision, leadership, direction, and management for all aspects of student support services. Special education is governed by, there's a lot of federal legislation regarding it and then state legislation. There's program development that happens locally within the district as well as CSE annual review meetings. We have FTE decision-making, which is based on student needs as a result of the annual review meetings, and then obviously connections with what individual students need. So special, I feel, this is the, I'm sorry, I'm like, I feel like this is not the same program. I saw it originally and then I'm like, this is not it.
I'm sorry, guys.
I thought maybe there were just a couple slides added at the beginning.
I'm glad it wasn't just me.
Yeah, no.
That's me.
You're doing great. I had no idea that wasn't.
Well, there were some slides, there were edits to it, so I had seen some of them before, but, so going to the overall department structure, I wanted to highlight this because there's some changes on the agenda tonight in regards to the structure. So the current student support services model had the Director of Student Support Services, assistant directors in each of those categories, which involve special education, MTSS, and counseling and social work. During the course of the year, one of the things that became clear was that there was more of a need in special education that was just the nature of the department is a large department. So you'll see in the next slide for the structure for 24-25 that we've shifted some roles and responsibilities. And so instead of the assistant directors and some of the roles and responsibilities, there will be a director of special ed, which is on the agenda for this evening for the board to approve that position, as well as a director of MTSS and UPK and director of counseling and SEL. Many of the responsibilities in MTSS and counseling will be the same as well as special ed, but you can see that special education also has an assistant director of special education as part of that structure, and we've shifted some of the 504 responsibilities, which 504s historically have fallen under special education, but that is a general education service. So we want to put those in the proper categories. We still believe that there's a great need for collaboration, and this model will meet the needs of not only the students, but also allow us the continuum of services that we should have in the district. I also thought it was important to highlight what's allowable under state ed, because it's not, districts don't just have the autonomy just to create random programs in special education. There's certain protocols that have to be followed. So just looking at the continuum of allowable services from state ed, you start at the least restrictive environment, which is the general education program. You go up into general education with some supports. That could be, for example, a student who might need a 504 plan. Onto consultant teacher, integrated co-teaching, which we do have in the district, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. That is the only program along the continuum which is optional for school districts to have or not. Then you have resource room, special classes, out-of-district placements, and so on up until the least restrictive, or the most restrictive environment. The goal, obviously, is to have students always in the least restrictive environment that meets their needs. So looking at the different programs that we have in the district and that are required under New York State, you have direct consultant teachers, which we have in the district. This is when a special education teacher will work with students in a general education classroom, but they only work with students who have IEPs, and their goal is to meet the needs of those students in the classroom. You also can have something that's called an indirect consultant teacher, which a special education teacher will service those students, but not directly in the classroom. They might be consulting with a general education teacher to help them with what are appropriate modifications to meet the needs of students. And then resource room is a pretty traditional placement. That is when students generally, for example, at the middle or high school, might have a class that's scheduled 5 days a week for 40 minutes in a small group setting, up to 5 students who meet with a special education student, special education teacher, to meet the goals of their IEP. You also have integrated co-teaching. This is the program that's optional. And this is when you have a special education teacher and a general education teacher in a classroom working with all students. So the special education teacher is not just working with students with IEPs, and the general education teacher is not just working with students who don't have IEPs. They work collaboratively in a partnership, and they support all the students within that classroom. The only programs you can see the special class settings, so these are the programs that are required to have certain ratios in them. So you can have 15-1, meaning 15 students in one teacher. In a 12-1-1, you would have 12 students, one teacher, and one classroom aide. You'd have an 8-1-1, which is 8 students, one teacher, one aide, and a 6-1-1. And then the most restrictive environment is the 12-1 plus 3, where you have to have additional support for every 3 students in those classrooms. And this applies not only to public schools, but also private school settings as well. So you can have any of those special class settings, dependent upon what the needs of the students are. Those ratios could change, not typically from year to year, but you may have certain groups of students who come through where your ratios may vary on any given year. And for next year, some of the changes that are happening in Bethlehem, we do have the integrated programs, which I mentioned is when a special education and a general education teacher work together in a classroom to serve the needs of all students. So we have integrated K-1 model, which has come up about the skills classes. In the integrated K-1 model does replace that K-1 skills program that we've had historically. We also are adding an integrated classroom at Glenmont in kindergarten, one at Hammergrill also in kindergarten, a grade 2 at Slingerlands, a grade 3 at Slingerlands, another grade 3 at Glenmont, and another grade 5 at Hammergrill. We do, even though in an integrated program, aid support is not required, we do have aides in all of those programs planned for next year. Another change at the secondary level, we have a direct consultant teacher model. In the middle school, that's when a special education teacher is in some of the general ed classes, providing supports generally to students who have IEPs. And we have a special class at the high school of 15-1 for grade 9 students who are in the Excel program. There's a question about how many students are attending their non-elementary school, meaning they're in a different elementary school because of a special ed program that's only offered in certain buildings. So here you have a listing of how many students this year are in their non-elementary schools. So you can see Eagle had 15 this year, and next year they will have 11 students who are in another school. At Ellesmere, this year there's 8, and next year there will be 12. And Glenmont, 12 and 14. Hammergrill, the reason this is so high is because that's where the skills classes have been located. We moved the one from Glenmont to Hammergrill this year, so you had a large bubble there this year. Next year, you see that goes down substantially. Slingerland's 12 and 8, and we have currently 33 students who are in out-of-district placements. Those out-of-district placements could be at BOCES and private placements or residential. And next year, we're anticipating having 35 students who are in out-of-district placements. Also, looking at just generally, these are the programs offered at all of our schools. We do have consultant teacher, direct and indirect at our schools, as well as resource room and obviously related services. At Eagle next year, we plan to have a grade 1. When we say co-taught, that's referring to the integrated co-teaching. So grade 1, grade 4, and grade 5. At Ellesmere, we have the Connections program, and we have a grade 4 co-taught. Glenmont, we have kindergarten, grade 1, grade 3, and grade 5. Hammergrill, the Foundations program, kindergarten and grade 5. Slingerlands, we have grades 2 and 3 that are all co-taught. And then in the middle school, in addition to the programs listed above, we also have the Connections and the Applications program. At the high school, we have the RISE program and the Self-Contained program. And at the high school, I can let you know that we lost our partnership with St. Rose for the students who went to the college for their post-high school after they between 18 and 21, and we did just sign a contract with SUNY Albany yesterday. So we will be partnering with SUNY Albany for that program for the coming year. And I want to just touch on the aids to students with disabilities because there were some questions about this. As I said, that the programs that are special classes, these are the ratios that we're required to have. Any additional aid support, aside from the integrated co-teaching, which we do have aid support in all of those programs at the elementary level because we feel that based on the needs of the students, that's needed for the coming year. Any other aid support is done through the CSE process, and that's looked at by individual student needs. So for example, let's say you have 8 students in one of the integrated classes. There's one aide already assigned. If there, through the CSE process, were a couple of 2 or 3 kids who might need additional support, and there was a sense that one aide was not going to be enough, then there might be another aide assigned there through the day or for a partial day. We do have some students who also have a one-to-one aide, and that could be for medical reasons or mobility reasons or behavioral reasons. Again, that's done through the CSE process. I do think it's important to note that when you have a one-to-one aide, that is the most restrictive accommodation a student can have. And that is not the goal of the CSE. The goal of the CSE is to give students the least restrictive environment possible. And certainly if there's kids who need that level of support, we can provide it. But the goal is to have students have the experience that all their other peers have, which is a least restrictive environment in a general education program when possible. There's other questions about how are these decisions made. So we do have a special ed cabinet that was formed, and that's made up just like our other cabinets in math, ELA, science, and social studies. That group works to look at our programs, look at the continuum, make recommendations, and that's made up of special education teachers, general education teachers, administrators that meet throughout the years to provide input and feedback and make changes to the program. There was also a question about parent collaboration, and there has been parent representations sporadically, I would say, over the years. Some districts, they do have a special ed PTA or PTO, which would be an option if parents wanted to do that. Certainly, if there's ways that the special education department can work in partnership with parents, it would be great to have a consistent parent group that could be part of, for example, President's Council on a regular basis. But it seems that kind of something happens and then there's some interest and then it fizzles out. So hopefully that would be a way with the new director coming in that they could look to foster that partnership. Speaking of which, with the director, assistant director, we do have on the agenda tonight Deb Sharp, who's a former director of special ed in Albany, who is on the agenda to be interim assistant director who can start July 1. So she will be a point person for things that happen over the summer or in the future. We'll be sending information out to let families know that she will be on board starting July 1. And for ESY, we do have a coordinator, Mackenzie Barrett, who's on the agenda for appointment tonight, who will be, aside from the teachers, which is who most of the time the parents are communicating with the teachers in ESY, but she will be overseeing that program and will also have information on how parents can contact her. So I hope I answered all the questions that were asked, but feel free if you have additional questions or need clarification, I'm happy to do that.
Catherine? Oh, sure. Willa?
I can start, sure. Thank you. I know that most of that was based on questions that I gave you, so I don't have too many questions.
Okay.
I will reiterate, I think there is an interest in reinvigorating some sort of parent advisory council. Speaking only for myself, the idea of a special ed PTA to me is sort of offensive because those students are part of every school building, and I don't know why you'd have a separate PTA, but.
I agree with that. I'm just saying some districts do have it.
Which takes me to my first comment, which is on the first slide. If we can just try to, maybe it's not the first slide, if we can just try to remember to not use the word regular when we're describing a general education class. Integrated K1. So that was the next slide. We said the integrated K1 would replace the K1 skills. So same students that would have been recommended for a K-1 skills will be served in the integrated K-1 instead? And then would
Correct.
we, and what building is that?
There's one at Glenmont and one at Hamagrow.
So then we would expect to see potentially an integrated 2 in those?
Yes, so those, when we start that's a good point. When we start a integrated program, that program continues in that elementary school through 5th grade.
Okay, so
Yes.
I was gonna ask that as well on this slide. So like Slingerland's currently has a co-taught 2 and a co-taught 3.
Mhm.
So the following school year, maybe we'd see a co-taught 3 and a co-taught 4.
Correct.
So to let kids age out
So-
in place. Awesome.
Right, that's the goal.
And the slide with the numbers of out of catchment area,
Yep.
K-5, the one
Mhm.
before. So the 33 at Hamagrail, which you described as a bubble, where do they go? So those were skills rooms at Hamagrail that no longer
Right.
exist next year. So then where
Correct.
do all those students?
So some of those students went to the middle school because that was the grade, if you remember, Glenmont had the.
Skills 5.
Correct, the 4-5. So some of those students went to the middle school. Some of them are in co-taught integrated programs at Hamagrow, and some went back to their home schools.
So they got sent back to their home schools to get a co-taught.
Potentially.
Okay. I hate that answer. And then, do we still have 4th or 5th graders going to the middle school?
For
For
the,
the,
yes,
into whatever the word is. in
Correct.
the middle school. Okay.
yeah, that's on, yes, that's correct.
Okay. And just on the one-to-one aids, I just want to reiterate, I think you sort of said it, if a student needed a one-to-one and the alternative was to be sent out of district, then we would put a one-to-one
Correct.
back in their IEP. Okay.
Absolutely,
Okay,
yeah.
thanks.
Can I just follow up, what is the 4th, 5th grade going to the middle school?
It's for the intensive, it's on here, the applications program.
Okay.
Those are students who will be in the district till they're 21 or 22. So the grades don't necessarily align with their ages, depending upon their levels. So a few years ago, that was shifted to, Ellesmere has the one program, and then they go to the middle school, and then at the high school, it's the RISE program. So the goal was looking at, one, numbers, and what does this look like, and having students balance out the number of years they were spending at Ellesmere, the middle school, and the high school. Because having students at the high school necessarily for 8 years wasn't necessarily the best program for those students as well. So it was looking at historically the students we have, the age ranges, and what the band of students looked like.
So connections, applications, and RISE are different stages of effectively the same thing?
They can cross over. So connections and applications are 2 different programs at the middle school, and the RISE program is a continuum at the high school. At the Ellesmere is the connections program. Sorry, so the connections at Ellesmere and the connections at the middle school
Yeah.
are similar programs. Then they go to the RISE program potentially at the high school.
And I just would try to argue for my very last board meeting, that if the concern is spending that long in the high school, really what the solution to me seems that we should try to work on is for the 20, 21, 22-year-olds that are or up until they're 22, right, in the high school, we need to focus on an independence transition vocational program for those students, so they're spending less time at the high school, but
Sure, we
that-
have
but
that.
that a 4th and 5th grader.
I don't think we have any 4th graders.
Just 5th graders.
Yeah, we don't have
I
4th
mean,
graders. They're
Even a, like, mature general education 5th grader, as compared to the other students in the middle school, it's just such a big difference. So to think that just because a student is going to receive an education into their 20s means that at 11 years old, they don't.
keep in mind, sometimes they're not 11, right? So that's part of it, but I understand what you're saying, and it's something to look at.
Catherine, you have a question?
A couple questions, so interrupt me if you want to have a different flow here. So first of all, just to make sure that we're all speaking the same language, do I hear you using, oh my goodness, COTA and,
Integrated is the same
Thank you. We're
It says
just using-
COTA, but it's, by the
Same
state
thing.
ed continuum, it's integrated.
great, I just want to, again, make sure we're using this, that I'm understanding the language the right way. So then going to, if we can go to the slide after this one, please. So we have the different ratios here. A couple things. I want to lift up things I think I heard you saying. First of all, every co-taught class will also by default have an aide. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And for students who have gone through conversations with CSE and have on their IEPs that they need additional one-on-one support, is it possible that there's another aide in there working with them, or is it possible that we've got that one aide assigned to a particular?
No, if there was an additional one-to-one aide on someone's IEP, there would be an additional aide in the classroom.
Great, just thank you. And then, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth in my notes here. And then I think my last question, one of the parents who spoke at our last meeting was asking for, like, you know, what happens, and especially in some of the situations where the support a student is getting is behavioral. So what happens when a student's having a really tough day and where they would have been in perhaps a smaller classroom or with more support, you know, then how are we anticipating addressing those problems when they come up?
So that happens regularly with special ed students and general education students. Sometimes depending upon the level of behavior, there might be an individualized behavior plan that's followed. Sometimes that requires an aide to be tracking that. Sometimes there's things built in where they have a timeout in a different location of the building until they calm down and can rejoin the classroom. Sometimes it might be a different spot in the classroom. Sometimes it's an alternative activity. There's generally some kind of incentives, and there's data that's associated with that that's usually communicated back and forth between school and home. So that's how that typically would be handled.
Thank you. I've got a couple more. Shall I keep going? Do you want to catch other folks?
Go ahead.
Another comment that we've been hearing is just making sure folks have as much time as possible, that with their students, shifts like this can be big. So how are we getting the word out? How are we talking with parents about shifts that are coming, with families, and making sure that concerns or additional needs are being met?
I guess shifts, do you mean if they're shifting from one program to another?
Yes, or shifting from one type of support to a co-taught classroom.
Right.
Or, right.
So, I mean, typically those final decisions are made during the annual review process at CSE meetings. I would hope that there's conversations happening between the special education teacher or related service providers prior to that time. There should be conversations happening as if your child is going to a more restrictive environment, what's the basis for that and why, and helping the parents understand that. If they're going to a least restrictive environment, what's the rationale, how are they doing? Generally, they're showing growth, and a least restrictive environment is going to allow them more access to the general ed program and curriculum that would ultimately benefit them. So I would hope that there's conversations happening well before the CSE happens, and that the CSE really should just be finalizing what's put in place on the IEP for the coming year.
Thank you. Any questions?
I just wanted to clarify, and I hope we're not harping on this too much, but I want to make sure I understand it. So, we did have K-1 skills, and now that's being replaced by an integrated K-1 classroom, co-taught classroom. Regarding our intensive skills class, however, what are we doing with our kindergartners who would require intensive skills?
That's still the same. That hasn't changed.
That hasn't changed?
Correct.
Okay. So we have, my understanding is we have one K through 4 intensive skills class, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. is there a problem with having such a wide range of ages within that classroom?
Legally, no. I think programmatically, that's something that the special education department should be looking at on a regular basis. You know, with all of these programs, I mean, over the course of years, the programs have changed to adjust to the needs of the individual needs of students. I mean, that's what special education is. So if I know, for example, in some of the integrated programs for the coming year, there was a lot of discussions with the classroom teachers, the special education teachers, about the makeup of the students. And yes, there's an aide assigned to this program, but with this particular group of students, there's some really higher needs. So the special ed department in those conversations has assigned another aide to that classroom for support. I think that needs to be true with any of our programs. I think this year we had only a few students in that program at Ellesmere. If you ended up having, say, 8 students, that range might be too great, or at any level. So I think that every year you have to look at what is your group of students, what do you have students coming in, what are the needs, and make adjustments based on that. We have, in the past, when we had K2 and 3-5, the skills, it was called skills that time, or intensive skills, sorry, at Ellesmere, there were more students in each of those programs. So I think that it has to be somewhat fluid based on the needs of the students that we have at the time.
Okay. I would, just absolutely request that we keep on keeping an eye on especially that program, because those are really important kids that we keep an eye on. But also I would just ask that throughout this year with these changes, that we get input also from our aides and our teachers who are involved in these classrooms to see what their input is, to see what these changes are, because there are a lot of changes. Obviously, we want to be serving our students the best way possible, and I think our teachers and our aides have a lot of information that they could give us. So if we could, at the end of this year, get some sort of report back from people in the classroom every day about how these changes have worked out this year, I would appreciate it.
Well, we'd probably be doing that before then, because through the cabinet, I mean, that's the process for some of that review. Mm-hmm. And then if at budget time there's shifts and changes to any of that, or obviously we would need to bring that to the board. So,
okay. I would just appreciate that if we get
Sure.
That information from our teachers and aides.
Sorry, thank you for coming back, because I just remembered one other question that I had, which is for these for co-taught classrooms, is the plan that there will be both teachers and aid support throughout the day? Is this the established?
Some of the integrated classes are full day. The K classes, for example, are full day. Many of them are full day depending on the number of students that are in the class. And some of them are half day, which could be 2.5 to 3 or 3.5 hours. And then others are all day long. So it really depends on the number of students and the makeup of those students in that particular program.
Thank you. I think one of the things, if it's not clear in my questions, some of the families that I've talked to are, while they certainly want the least restrictive environment for their student, they're also just really concerned about the level of aid support and will their student be sufficiently supported. So if, as we make this transition, folks have concerns or more questions about that, their best person to speak to is the director of special ed, or start with, what's the best path?
I would start with the classroom teacher and the special ed teacher, because they're the ones who see the child every day.
Okay.
And they can speak to, especially with kindergarten, many families or students coming out of preschool, and preschool programs are very different than what kindergarten looks like. So speaking with them about how's my child doing, obviously there's an adjustment period, and if there's concern about the programming options, then that would be conveyed either through the CSE chair or the director to look at, maybe we may need to make some shifts for the future.
Thank you.
Yeah. You want?
Yeah. First one is something, my lack of knowledge. The Foundations program, tell me how is that different from Connections? What does that one do?
Which?
So you've got a Hammer Grail Foundations program?
It was called the Skills Program, so that's a program that's somewhat self-contained, although some students do go out for certain portions of the day, and others are in that classroom on a more regular basis. So it's intended to meet the needs of kids with more intense skills, or maybe have greater needs, either academically or behaviorally, with the goal of obviously having them go out into the general ed program to the degree that they can.
The other question, so I know there's a process for students whose needs are perhaps at a lower level than their peers. Students whose needs are at a higher level than their peers, do they also go through the IEP program? What does a parent do in those cases?
No, they would speak with the teacher, the classroom teacher, about if their needs are, I shouldn't say that. We have had some students that we've done some assessments on who have been very high level, but they typically wouldn't go through the CSE or IEP process. That's specifically for students with an identified need in special education. So they would work with the teacher on different avenues that they could for enrichment activities, essentially.
And
Yeah.
are there laws around that end of need?
No.
Yeah, just one. One of the things you talked about was the parent collaboration, and I think Willow had suggested that it might be a good thing to do that. To the extent that there were parents who wanted to start to get more involved or to have some kind of involvement, what's the best way for them to do that?
I would, at the beginning of the year, hopefully we'll have a director in place. I would hope that they would reach out to the families to invite them to talk about maybe options that they would like to meet. There's been a lot of different structures in place. There was meetings where it was more of a conversation with the prior director, then there was more of Willow participated in some of those where it was more of a presentation, where there are different presentation options. And then it's been certain small groups of parents. So I think that finding out what works for them, what would they like to have, whether it be, is it a level of support they would like? Is it a level where they just want a group to kind of share stories with and supports? I know supports for special education is important for families. I know going into the summer, for some families, the summer is a really stressful time because there's students not in a structured environment. There's not sometimes a lot of summer camps that are available for students with disabilities. So a resource, I think, for them. But I don't want to speak for what the parents' needs are. So I think that would be important for the director to try and identify what works for them to figure out how we best can partner with the parents.
Sure, thank you. I think that, just off the top of my head, I would imagine that communication and feedback into the effectiveness of all these changes is going to be something that's going to be on their mind.
Absolutely.
And so that should be, I assume the director will address that.
Yep. Willow, you have one more?
I didn't have another question, but I just wanted to reiterate, I know it's on the agenda for approval. I applaud that we tried the model we tried this year with the assistant directors and trying to integrate all those pieces, because I think that's really important. I think we know that students with disabilities are 50% more likely to need counseling, right? It all is so integrated. But I do really support the idea that we would hire a director of special education to stand on its own and backfill the assistant director. I think it's just, there's a lot of work there. So I just wanted to thank you for trying it one way and being flexible about going back to this model.
Thanks.
John, you had a question?
One question. When you do identify a student who has a situation where they may need to be in a program where we don't have the needs to, can you just talk about that process is?
You mean out of district?
Yeah, to have to send a student out of district.
Right. So typically that's done again through the CSE process, but we would typically start with looking at what programs do we offer? Is there a program here that meets the child's needs? If not, then obviously there's a lot of discussion that happens with families about what that looks like because, not being in the home district is a really tough thing for families. And then we would look at what programs that are around locally that we can look at that have a program that aligns with the needs of the child.
We have Cap Region BOCES that we partner with, Questar BOCES, and we have some students, not a lot, but who go to the Saratoga BOCES as well. But there's also private placements locally that also meet those needs. So the process is that once there's agreement that we need to look at an outside placement, we have to then apply to see if that student would be considered for acceptance into the program. And then typically the parents would go out and take a look at that program, see if this is something they're comfortable with. They might meet with the staff. And then the parents would typically agree to, yes, this is the program that I think will meet the needs of my child, or not. And then they might look at an alternative program. To be very honest, there are waiting lists for outside placements currently. And we've been fortunate that we haven't had a lot of students on waiting lists, but I know other districts have a lot of students that are on waiting lists. And so the availability, just because of staffing shortages, there's been some programs that have closed as a result of the lack of funding and lack of staffing. So the goal would be to keep as many of the students in district, not only because it's their home district, but because one, some of the programs that are available may be challenged. And there's just not a lot of availability, and that has become less and less, especially since the pandemic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Jody.
Next on the agenda is our recognition of public comment on an agenda item. If we have any visitors who would like to address the board on an agenda item, now would be the time to come to the microphone. And if you could state your name.
Yeah, my name is Karen Schottler-Tall. Can I speak about special education? Is that okay? Yeah, okay, thank you. I should say I'm a doctor, I'm a pediatrician, and I'm the director of the Autism Medical Home at Albany Medical Center, but I'm also a parent of a child in the RISE program. And that's the most restrictive environment. He's been in intensive skills all through his education here. And I must say, every single therapist and teacher we've encountered have been wonderful. So I want to say that at first. But coming into the high school, we've had a lot of systemic issues, and I really think the board should know about some of these issues that we've encountered as you start making some changes. And some of them have been a little bit heartbreaking, and I just wanted to bring it up to the board's attention. The first thing I want to bring up is some about the electives available. And as you know, if you have typical high school students, you get a whole big booklet of all the electives that a high school student can take. And there are pages and pages of electives: astronomy, photography, all kinds of wonderful things that your child could take. Well, this year my child could not take any electives. The first elective he was in was an art elective, and probably because it wasn't made or designed for him, and probably because of his vocalizations, his intellectual disability, and probably his language disability, he couldn't participate in over 60% of the classes, so he didn't really do an elective. The second semester, he didn't get assigned an elective. And I was told during that time, he would sit in his class and pace and play with putty, silly putty. Imagine how heartbreaking that was. Imagine that's your child. Imagine being a doctor who specializes in autism and your child, something like that happens to your child. We can do better than that. We're the top high school in the nation, or in the area, and this happens to you. So we really need to do something to train our elective teachers to make electives adapted to fit these students. There's no reason why Eric can't pick out the Big Dipper or take a picture of his mother or his dog. There's no reason. Let's have these people trained to take these children and teach them what they know. There's no reason. So that's number one. When I suggested some electives, one of the things I said is swimming. You know, being a pediatrician and specializing in this, Children with autism have a lower mortality. They die earlier than their peers. 15 years earlier. If they have intellectual disability, we're talking about life expectancy in their 40s. Cardiovascular disease, seizures, depression, suicide, and accidents are what usually cause people with autism to die earlier. The accidents are caused by drowning. So I really want Eric to start swimming. I was told that the pool's being repaired. Well, you know, a lot of parents in the RISE program tell me that the RISE children never take swimming in high school. They have in middle school, but not in high school. Come on, guys. Let's get these kids in the pool. It's fun to watch the typical swim team swim in the pool. Maybe not my kid, but he needs it. He needs it to survive. He needs it. So let's get these guys swimming. The third thing is summer program. Summer program used to be 6 hours long. It's 4 hours long. You know, I'm not saying it's for somebody to babysit my kid. I'm saying it because when he comes home, there's no camps. I try my best. I'm a doctor. I have to have somebody babysit him. And we try our best to keep him occupied, but there's no camps. Your kid who goes to camp gets to learn how to macrame, gets to learn how to swim, gets to learn a rope course, but there's no camps to teach him. In school, when it was 6 hours, he got to be in a talent show. He played the drum. He played the drum to We Will Rock You. It's the best parent experience ever. But he's not doing that now. He's there, he's learning his skills. Yeah, he's keeping up with his curriculum, what he's supposed to do, but he's not doing what he did back then. You know, it's just a disappointing thing as a parent not to see him do those things. And then the fourth thing is, luckily Eric's been able to stay in district. But the parents that I speak with, when their child is on the edge and they're not going to be able to stay in district, these are the skills kids, the intensive skills kids, the fear you see in their eyes. A lot of the programs are great, but there's programs out there that don't have teachers in the classroom. The waiting lists are long. In the future, can't we think of expanding Bethlehem so that these kids can stay in district? Can't we think of that? That'd be awesome. North Colony does it. Can't we do it? And that's why I bring it to you, because you guys are the thinkers and you guys can do it. I bring it to you because I think you guys can get things done. But that would be wonderful to have intensive skills and have these kids stay in district. The look in Eric's eyes when he's with his typical peers, it's amazing. He wants to be with you. We want to be with you. So sorry, I get a little emotional, but this means a lot. Thanks. I'll be happy to take questions if you want. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone else who wanted to address the board on an agenda item? Next, item 6, action items. A, finance action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following finance action items 1 through 10.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. B, professional personnel action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following professional personnel action items 1 through 23.
So moved.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. C, support personnel action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following support staff action items 1 through 9.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. D, other action items. It is recommended by the superintendent that the Board of Education approve the following action items 1 through 6.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries. Item 7, recognition of public comment on a non-agenda item. If we have any visitors who would like to address the board on a non-agenda item, now would be the time to come to the microphone. Item 8, future meetings and events. Tomorrow, Thursday, June 27th at 3 p.m. Is the class of 2024's graduation at the MVP Arena. And our organizational meeting for the next school year is on Tuesday, July 9th. Anticipating executive session at 6 o'clock and the meeting reconvening at 7. On Wednesday, August 7th, there is a facilities committee meeting here at the high school. And then on Wednesday, August 14th, that is our board meeting following the next board meeting, and anticipating executive session at 6 and the regular board meeting reconvening at 7. And that at the August 14th meeting, that's when we'll be setting the tax rate, correct? Okay.
So that is correct. It's Tuesday, July 9th. We're going
Correct.
off practice. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Seeing no need to go back into executive session, could I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Sorry, Willow.